Hello and welcome back to Crushing Comics, the show where I rekindle the romance with my comic book collection, which has traveled around the world to be with me. Here is my shelf of still wrapped comic bundles. I just did a rough count and I think we have enough to take us through like another 40 or so episodes if I keep only doing one bundle per episode. So you're going to be watching this show for a long time, I hope. It's kind of funny, the idea of seasons of TV and of shows and the way that we become used to them differently culturally and how that perception changes over time. I know when I started to see British shows for the first time in the 90s, was really confused by how short their runs were, although that's like a really common thing in the States right now, because now we get these shows that are great shows that are only ordered for like 10 and 13 episode runs. It's like more cost efficient and it can tell a more complete story. But to me at the time, the idea of a run was like a 22 to 26 episode order, which was really common for shows in the 80s and 90s because that was how long the TV season was, and also that was what they needed to do to get to the syndication point within 3 or 4 seasons. But then also that there's shows that were just on continuously, like soap operas and things like that, and it's funny, as a kid, you absorb that or don't. Like, what are kids absorbing now is they're just getting things in little binge drips from Netflix. Do they even have a concept? Kids these days. Do they even have a concept of what a television season is? I don't know. But this season of Unwrapping Books is going to be a really long one. It's the gist of that story. Let's see what we've got today. Ooh, I was just talking about this one a few episodes ago. This is the direct market variant cover of the Captain Britain Omnibus. Great stuff. So, this is an unusual Marvel Omnibus, in that it collects a lot of Marvel UK comic books, including a comic book called, let me see if I can find it, The Daredevils. And The Daredevils was partially reprinting books and partially printing original Captain Britain stories. Now, I must confess, I've actually never read much of this omnibus. It had just begun to reach whale status when I was okay, let's stop for some glossary of terms here. Whale is, I guess, a reference to like Captain Ahab and his elusive whale, or like Moby Dick or something, but it's what omnibus collectors call it when there's one book out there that is prohibitively hard to find and usually also pretty expensive. And this was just getting to that status at the point that I was starting my collection of omnibuses, and I was like, I better get it. Plus, I love Captain Britain, but I haven't read it yet because it wasn't like part of my cycle of reading at the time, as I was really catching up on to current day on X-Men at the time, so it's just been on the shelf. So this is a great example of something that I am ready to fall in love with, and it's from that sewn era of omnibuses that had the beautiful deboss on the cover. I love that. So Captain Britain really went through his development here. He had plenty of background in those 2 oversized hardcovers, which we recently took a look at. They're somewhere back here. Here they are. But this is really where his story got developed. Alan Davis and Alan Moore primarily developing it, and so, but also Jamie Delano and Chris Claremont. And this is where really got developed the idea of the multiverse. What's really interesting is this Marvel multiverse that we all know so well. We're also used to the idea of like Marvel 616, 616, which refers to the main continuity of Marvel. If I'm not mistaken, that originates from this run, because there was this idea of the Captain Britain nexus on Otherworld, where there were all these Captain Britons from all the different universes, much in the same way that there are Green Lanterns for different sectors. And that story and that concept really was pushed throughout this run and fully developed. We get to see it play out in Excalibur, but it's sort of brought to you as whole cloth in Excalibur, as if it's this thing that has always existed. It hasn't always existed. It's from this run. Now, this, I will never turn down Alan Davis artwork anywhere. I think he's really, truly one of the greats in comic books, and this is like early Alan Davis, because it's before Excalibur, and he's just fantastic. He draws these very animated faces, and so you can see the covers here haven't been restored as much as the actual comics. I I just love his faces. And I love his bodies and the kind of fluid way their muscles connect. The colors you'll notice compared to a lot of other omnibuses, like we've recently looked at that Uncanny X-Men omnibus with the Byrne and Cockrum art. I feel like the colors are a little bit more washed out here. I don't know if that has to do with the colors not being as dark to begin with, but just even here, like the fill on Megan is just like a little bit lighter and less saturated than we see in some other books. I don't know what that's about, because I've never seen any of the originals of this. This, again, one of these runs that was really impossible to come by. There was a Captain Britain normal size trade paperback, even back in the early 90s, because I have it in one of my original comic boxes from back then, that collected a chunk of this run to give you some background, because Marvel even then realized that people wanted to know who these characters were, and they just had no means of doing it in America because the comics weren't even released in America, all these UK comics. Again, much like those Captain Britain oversized hardcovers we looked at in a previous episode, this book collects only, I want to say 4 American comics in the whole book. New Mutants Annual 2, Uncanny X-Men Annual 11, and 2 issues of Captain America, 305 or 306. So that means all told, Captain Britain had only appeared in 7, 8 issues of American comic books, the original Marvel team-up books, the ones that are in this, and that's just about it, before he made the jump to Excalibur. So it was just like a really weird situation of a character completely unknown to American audiences that, by way of Psylocke joining the X-Men in the early 200s, suddenly became very relevant to X-Men, although again, he's not a mutant and he's never officially been an X-Men, nor does he really have that much of a relationship with Xavier and all of those X-Men characters, because Excalibur, you have to remember, thought the X-Men, I think, were dead at the point that they became Excalibur, and the X-Men really didn't know what was going on with Kitty Pryde and all of those folks, so they didn't really run into each other for quite some time at the beginning of the title. So Captain Britain really didn't start to form a relationship with that team until much later in Excalibur, when there started to be more X-Men crossovers into Excalibur. So I'm so happy to have unpacked this book. It is definitely one of my favorites, and it is going right alongside the other 2 OHCs to create a complete run of pretty much every single Captain Britain appearance that had ever happened, with the scant exception of a few cameos maybe, right up until he joins Excalibur. So here is the ceremonial shelving of Captain Britain. Join me next episode and for several dozen episodes apparently after that, while I continue to fall in love with my comic collection all over again. Thank you so much for tuning in to Crushing Comics.